We are continuing on in track 6. This is week 3 of our spiritual teachings, and we are talking about ministry and different ministry models. This week, we're going to look at Peter. Obviously, he was one of the disciples of Christ, but also he was the founder of the church. There are always times when we feel incompetent when faced with one end of ministry or another. The challenges are more often than not unprecedented and, at the very least, unforeseen. But don't worry, because you're in good company if you're facing hardship. The apostles ran into questions they could not answer, never before imagined difficulties, and disputes over some pretty important things. Today, let's showcase a problem solver, Peter. We know his name well. We know he walked on water. We know he denied association with Jesus when rubber met the road. But we also know that Jesus said that he would build his church on this rock of a man. So what of any value can we learn from Peter's example? Well, how about growth? As a leader, we must consistently confront the idea that we might not have it all down yet. There may be just more to learn, something more to understand a little bit better. Sometimes it feels like we know all there is in a specific arena, but let's allow room for Jesus to flip everything we know right on its head. In Acts chapter 10, we read about the dream God gives Peter that turns his Judaizing world upside down. He had a vision of a sheet filled with a whole bunch of unclean creatures that were forbidden for Jews. And God told him, "Eat." Typical Peter response, "No, Lord." And then Peter reminds the Lord that those animals are unclean, as if the Lord needed to be reminded. But all it took was a correction from God to change everything. Well, that was at least until Antioch. Do you remember the Judaizers in the Bible? In Galatians chapter 2, Paul confronts a group of Christians for requiring converts from Judaism to uphold the law in order to obtain or at least maintain their salvation. Well, guess who showed up right in the middle of the mess? It's Peter. Peter knew what the Lord said about the Gentiles. Do not call unclean what I have made clean. That's what God said to Peter in the book of Acts. And he was just fine hanging out with them, eating with them, and everything else until some of the other apostles with their own unique requirements came along. Then Peter adopts a mentality and wouldn't associate himself with Gentile believers anymore. Oftentimes, just like Peter, we can quickly abandon something that we previously believed to be God. In Acts chapter 15, Paul and Barnabas confront Peter and help him see clearly again. So, will we, like Peter, allow a rebuke of a brother or sister to help us grow? Peter was undeniably bold from the start. Before he was even a disciple, his career choice proved him to be. A fisherman was required to have his wits about him, strong survival skills, to be up to the physical labor, and to be hardworking. And then he was recruited by Jesus, and he dropped everything and went all in. Walking on water was only one example, and that was obviously one of the more popular ones. But from the moment Peter recognized that he was a sinful man in Luke chapter 5, Peter's impulsive nature really began to shine. He never hesitated to blurt out that Jesus was the Messiah when asked. And on the Mount of Transfiguration, he was ready to set up a campsite for Jesus and his buddies so that they could park there because he knew something miraculous was happening. One of the reasons that Peter's boldness is useful in ministry was because he always positions himself behind Jesus. His entire identity as a fisherman had been laid down, and now he was completely wrapped up, enveloped in Christ. He wanted to be like him, and he wanted to do what he did. So as much as he may have said, "No, Lord," he was always ready to adjust, to realign himself, and to follow him again. It was no accident that Jesus called him by first saying, "Follow me," in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. And later, when he last spoke to him, he ended with, "Follow me," in John chapter 21:19. Peter was known for winging it. If we're talking film language, he is a run-and-gun style cinematographer. Just give him a camera and let him shoot. Old Western terms, he's probably a shoot first, ask questions later type of a guy. I mean, remember in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus is being arrested? He swings his sword, cuts off the guy's ear, and Jesus has to repair all the damage that Peter has done. Or if you want a sports analogy, Peter's a guy who swings for the fences. He's going to hit home runs often, but he's also going to strike out a lot. Peter would miss it, but Peter always seemed to make an impact in the people around him. Whether it was the disciples and his friends or the masses in his community, he was a force to be reckoned with for the kingdom. He may have stepped onto a soapbox a time or two, but because he was committed to grow and to follow the Lord with his boldness, his ministry example is worth noticing. So, what can we take away from Peter's ministry model? 1, be bold. 2, fail often. And 3, receive correction. Peter was bold. He tried new things and failed all the time. But when the Lord brought correction to him every single time, he realigned himself and got back on track with God. So often I think we are terrified to miss it with God. But if we can learn anything from Peter, it's simply that his grace is more than enough.